Over the weekend, Donald Trump announced a new trade deal with the European Union. It will result in a $90 billion.
The argument presented is that President Donald Trump's America First policies, and in particular his aggressive utilization of tariffs, unintentionally strengthened the very organizations he aimed to undermine, most notably the BRICS alliance. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. While his confrontational strategy was intended to safeguard U.S. economic interests and the continued global preeminence of the dollar, it instead cultivated a pervasive sense of shared grievance among BRICS members. This common frustration spurred them to intensify their collaboration and expedite their collective drive toward a more genuinely multipolar world order. The central thesis is that a policy designed to enforce unipolarity instead became the primary catalyst for a shift toward multipolarity. Trump's contradictory logic, a fundamental misunderstanding of global power dynamics. The core of this analysis is rooted in the profound and systemic contradiction inherent in Trump's foreign policy approach. While he consistently framed his actions as a necessary and patriotic defense of American economic and political supremacy, the author contends that these actions were based on a deeply flawed and anachronistic assumption that the United States could unilaterally impose its will on the rest of the world without facing significant and indeed counterproductive repercussions. He viewed the BRICS alliance not merely as a competitor in the global marketplace, but as an existential threat, an organization established specifically to degenerate our dollar. This highly zero-sum perception led him to employ aggressive, often punitive tactics like tariffs and overt threats, which were intended to intimidate and subordinate these nations. However, this approach failed to recognize the burgeoning agency, economic resilience, and strategic autonomy of these nations. By attempting to bully them, Trump effectively substantiated their core argument that the existing global order, which places the U.S. dollar at its very center, is inherently vulnerable and subject to the unpredictable, self-serving whims of a single nation's political leadership. This stark reality served as a powerful and undeniable incentive for BRICS members to move even more swiftly in constructing their own parallel financial and political architecture. This strategy, intended to reinforce and solidify U.S. dominance, instead revealed its potential for profound instability, thereby fueling the de-dollarization movement it was ostensibly designed to prevent. It was an exercise in self-sabotage, demonstrating how a lack of strategic foresight can turn a policy into its own worst enemy. The Brazil case, from political meddling to the forefront of de-dollarization. The case of Brazil offers a particularly compelling and detailed illustration of this dynamic. During the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, a self-declared political ally, the Trump administration maintained a relatively cordial and personally driven relationship with the country. However, this rapport was built on a shaky foundation of personal affinity rather than a robust framework of long-term strategic alignment. With the return to power of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, a left-wing leader with a strong and publicly declared commitment to the global South, Trump's stance shifted dramatically. The imposition of a steep 50% tariff on Brazilian goods was more than just a simple economic measure. It was a clear political statement of disapproval, a punitive action designed to weaken Lula's government and signal U.S. displeasure with his policies and his orientation toward non-Western powers. This move, however, proved to be a profound and consequential miscalculation. Faced with this direct and unprovoked economic aggression, Lula's administration did not capitulate or alter its course. Instead, it was given a clear and popular mandate to strategically diversify Brazil's economic relationships and fundamentally reduce its systemic vulnerability to U.S. pressure and political influence. This strategic pivot led directly to a dramatic and rapid deepening of Brazil's ties with China, which has now definitively surpassed the United States as Brazil's largest and most important trading partner. Furthermore, President Lula seized the moment on the global stage, becoming one of the most vocal and articulate proponents of de-dollarization. He publicly and rhetorically challenged the status quo, asking, "Why should all countries be forced to trade with the dollar?" This fundamental shift in policy and rhetoric was not merely a political choice, but a direct and pragmatic reaction to what Brazil viewed as economic coercion and a unilateral assertion of power. In this sense, Trump's policy, which was intended to punish Brazil and reassert U.S. power, ended up empowering a new leader and propelling a key BRICS nation to the very forefront of the de-dollarization movement. The policy, while aiming to enforce American dominance, instead catalyzed a powerful movement away from it, demonstrating the counterproductive nature of a purely transactional approach to complex international relations. The move reinforced the BRICS narrative that a new, more balanced financial system is urgently needed. The India case, a self-inflicted wound to U.S. strategic interests. Similarly, Trump's policy toward India stands as a monumental and self-inflicted wound to long-term U.S. strategic interests. For decades, the U.S. has painstakingly worked to cultivate India as a crucial counterweight to China's rising influence in Asia. The formation of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad, comprising the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, was a cornerstone of this strategy, an alliance openly aimed at containing China in the Indo-Pacific region. Despite this carefully constructed diplomatic and strategic framework, Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy prevailed over long-term geopolitical logic. He viewed India's favorable trade balance with the U.S. as a sign of economic exploitation and, despite the country's profound and undeniable strategic importance, threatened India with a crippling 50% tariff. This punitive stance deeply strained the relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government, which had been gradually and carefully moving closer to the U.S. The move was widely and publicly seen in India as a betrayal of trust, a clear and unambiguous signal that the U.S. valued short-term trade wins over a long-term strategic partnership. In response to this pressure, India, a key BRICS member, did not capitulate or bow to Washington's demands. Instead, it re-evaluated its strategic options and, in a clear political message, extended a diplomatic olive branch to China, a move that directly contradicted years of U.S. policy and diplomatic efforts. The symbolic meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping at a BRICS summit was a clear signal that India would not be a mere pawn in a U.S.-led containment strategy. This diplomatic gesture provided a crucial boost to the BRICS alliance, demonstrating its internal cohesion and its ability to offer its members viable and attractive alternatives to U.S. hegemony. The episode showcased the BRICS alliance as a credible platform for strategic autonomy, strengthening its appeal for other nations seeking to reduce their reliance on the U.S. The broader consequences of unilateralism and the rise of multipolarity. The overarching theme is that Trump's foreign policy operates on a fundamentally different and more primitive premise than traditional, long-term diplomacy. He sees the world as a strict zero-sum game, where one country's gain is invariably another's loss, and he consistently prioritizes unilateral action over collaborative multilateral cooperation. This approach, however, fails to account for the growing multipolarity of the global system. The BRICS nations are not simply beholden to U.S. interests. They have other options and are increasingly willing and able to exercise their sovereignty. They have diligently built institutions like the New Development Bank, NDB, and the Contingency Reserve Arrangement, CRA, as viable and credible alternatives to the Western-led World Bank and IMF. These institutions provide a crucial financial safety net and a robust platform for development and trade, independent of Western influence and conditionalities. By acting unilaterally and with a my way or the highway attitude, the Trump administration has, perhaps more than any other recent factor, catalyzed a global movement away from U.S. economic and political dominance. It has given countries like Brazil and India a compelling and publicly visible reason to seek stability, security, and cooperation within the BRICS framework, thereby reinforcing the alliance and accelerating the very trends the U.S. sought to reverse. Ultimately, Trump's policies, while aimed at preserving a unipolar world, have inadvertently acted as the primary catalyst for the very multipolar order he feared, leaving the U.S. increasingly isolated.